Wow. Episode 20 something.
2.
22.
Wow,
I
you're
can't
like,
believe it's ages. 22. It's loads of episodes.
I know it's a lot of episodes. I should do a lot more to promote it. I need to update the audio, to put them on Facebook. I'm gonna have time this week, actually.
Oh, you are?
I think
Okay.
so. I might not do it, but I have time. Yeah, I have my last class, not last class. I have another class in a couple of weeks, but I have one class on Monday. I finished grading mostly.
Oh, wow.
I spent a lot of my week grading. It's I really, really don't envy full-time teachers. I'm having a lot of the actual experience of what it is to be a teacher. I mean, well, I'm obviously teaching.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had to prepare an exam thing. What do you call it? A subject, topic,
Test,
test,
exam.
the test, the write-up. Like, what is the test? I had to write it. It took me 2.5 to 3 hours to work out what I was going to do. It's the first time I ever do this. I've never
Yeah,
done this
yeah, yeah.
before.
You're like teacher training, like for real. This is what teacher training's like, but you've got no guidance. By the
No.
sounds of it. So that
No.
makes it much harder.
No.
So I've got this massive list of questions.
Oh yeah, from your students?
Well,
Just
not many.
all of the ones that have been asked before that have not been answered?
Yeah, it blurs the ones from my students and yours.
It doesn't really matter which ones they come from
No, it
ultimately.
doesn't. But what's really interesting is the overlap and the repeated themes, and it's very interesting.
Did you try
Very
to group
interesting.
them up to see, like, are there a lot of questions of the same type that should maybe be answered because there's a lot of people asking?
I didn't try that actually. I probably should, but I need to collect some more from my guys.
Okay.
So, how
We do
about
the t-shirts?
we'll do the t-shirts and you
Okay.
still got the same mug?
I changed. I have a Paris mug. I'm sure I've had it before. I don't have a lot
Did
of
you
mugs, but
also change your camera?
this is a normal one. The old, like, kind of blurry. I prefer the focus on this one.
Yeah, because you had the bigger one. It's gone.
The other one catches a lot of light, so when it's dark, like, it's a gray day, but it's not horrible right now. Yeah, and the other one was freaking me out in terms of the angle. It's
That's very
weird.
funny. I got this one. I'll go back to this.
I got the Paris. So this Paris mug was given this. It was a Christmas gift from last year. My mom gave me after I had just moved back to Paris, and I'm in the center of Paris, surrounded by souvenir shops. So she got me a Paris mug.
I like it. And what's the hoodie?
The hoodie is
Be French. It's really cool in the form of an ice cream.
mhm,
Oh wow.
a
Is he
smoking ice
smoking a
cream.
cigarette?
Yeah, he's smoking a cigarette. Be French. It's really cool.
An ice lolly smoking a cigarette. I think you might like my one today.
I like it a lot. It's very appropriate. I think it's very appropriate, but maybe that's just my doomsday mood speaking.
Well, it's the old Google logo. It's not this anymore. It's changed.
Yeah. So is there a new Skynet t-shirt?
It's not a new Skynet t-shirt. Although interestingly, I was talking about the doomsday clock with one of my classes.
Have you heard there was a scandal around Google parts the last few days?
What? No. What happened?
I only caught part of it in an article from The Verge. There is a prominent AI ethicist professor who was a Google employee working on, good AI or AI ethics, which is really just, I was like, wow, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Reading the article, I was like, oh yeah, of course it's a thing. And they have teams of these people at Google, obviously. All right, okay. Who got dismissed very briefly. And so it seemed to be a complicated story because there was a lot of who said what, when, etc. But generally speaking, she was working on a research paper. Her side of the story seems to be that she was working on a research paper, went to her superiors to get stuff checked in. In short, I'm not doing the story justice particularly, just so everybody knows, because we're recorded. So I just want to make sure that that's said. So they're working on research reports, and basically her hierarchy was not comfortable with the research and didn't want to publish it or something like that. And she was about to go on vacation for Thanksgiving, and so the management says, because they tweeted officially, the management says that she kind of put an ultimatum about, like, these are my conditions for XYZ, or else I'll resign. So the management said, okay, we accept your resignation. And she said, no, this is not how it went down at all. So anyway, from 1 hour to the next. And then the other added element within that is that she sent a long email to a distribution group internally that was all like research and various aspects of AI and research, telling everybody to basically, like, that they're going to get it blocked at every turn, and that ultimately the corporate perspective on things is not going to support any kind of the research that they're doing, and that she's gotten bored of it. Of course, she happens to be Black. She happens to be specializing in matters of, I don't even know how to say that or reproduce it, because it was a few days ago I read the article of prejudice within AI. So there's just, like, one of her thesis or something that she's quite known for apparently is to show that face recognition software recognizes white guys like 95% of the time, but Black women like 50% or things like that, right? So there's a lot of gaps in that kind of work and the way that programming is done that is prejudiced from the get-go, because it's in the way the algorithms are programmed. I'm sure this is extreme simplification of what is actually going on. So anyhow, the management didn't really like the email that was sent out and said, well, this is not how a Google employee and manager conducts themselves. And that's her version, saying that she got, anyway, of course, tweet storms, employer unions, like everything to do with Silicon Valley troubles in terms of both discrimination, prejudice, employee treatments of Silicon Valley big tech companies who are doing everything they can, seemingly apparently doing a lot, but it's not sure because they're saying they're not, to prevent employees to unionize or to protect themselves, etc., that kind of thing. So anyway, that's been kicking. I don't know what happened in the last couple of days, but
wow,
it was a big deal.
Okay, so the question
took us on a tangent before the question was even asked.
Yeah, that's all right. That's right, because it made me think of something else, but I don't want to go down that road yet.
No.
So and I think we've answered something like this before.
Oh, okay.
But I can't quite remember. Looking through the questions.
Choosing the questions.
Yeah.
Choose another one if it's something that we already talked about. I mean, I don't know. Choose whatever you want.
Well, let's go with this one. So this is a kind of a broad one, but it speaks directly to your area of expertise, I think. So the question is, how do you succeed in the communication field?
Well, you know what I'm going to say first. I mean, I've not said that in the past few questions, but it's, well, how do you define success? Is really the bigger question within this one. But
yes, it is.
That's my opinion about that. So we'll cover all of it, obviously.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I get into that a lot with my pupils, because I teach business. They're very much like, you're only a teacher. I think we talked about this before.
Yeah.
And
you're only a teacher, like you don't know.
Yeah. And
which is fair. Well, it's not fair, actually. It's not fair at all. But
everything, And to be fair,
Actually, I'm going to mention one thing about that. Sorry.
Sure. And to be fair, some of the classes are understanding that success isn't about money in the long run, really.
Yeah, we talked about this a bunch of times.
We have. And they're understanding that it's like you have money and then the amount of happiness just plateaus, regardless of the amount of money you have. Some of them are beginning to actually talk in those terms. But there are others who are like, no, I'm just going to earn loads of money and I'll be way more successful than you because I earn more money. And of course, I say to them, well, it all depends on how you define success. Yeah. And then the boys get really silly about it, saying, yeah, I'm going to have a house and then be married to a really fit woman. And that's how they talk. That's how they think. And it's completely ridiculous. And I do think having my personal circumstances.
What's ridiculous is I'd never said that when I was a teenager. I was not hanging out with anybody who, well, it's not that I didn't want those things, but I certainly didn't go up to my teacher saying, I'm going to be more successful than you and I'm going to have a big house and a big car and a hot wife. And I'm like, that usually we aspired to other things. We wanted to go travel, wanted to change the world in various ways, make it better. We were not thinking like, I want to be like my parents and have a house in the suburbs. That's it.
Back up a second. So when you were like 17, 18, you were thinking in terms of changing the world?
Yeah. I riled up my high school to go march in 1995, like against, a year ago, the big retirement reforms that were being planned in France that kicked up a whole big amount of protests and strikes, etc. The last time the government tried to do that was in 1995, and it was one of the biggest sets of strikes ever that lasted a month or 3.5 weeks. And there were big marches all around France, and that was, I riled up my high school to go up to Paris to go march, because there was also a bunch of other stuff. It was not only retirement plans; it was teachers, education. So yes, of course, isn't that, I mean, maybe things have changed, but like being a teenager is a big time for wanting to change things that are not working because you know better than the adults that have fucked up the world. No? Not your teenagers?
No, I'm not, never mind my teenagers. I'm thinking me. Oh.
We talked about this before around the Black Lives Matter movement. You told me you never went to a march. I was at a march last week again.
You were.
We talked about that last Sunday.
I've never been to a march, but I
didn't go yesterday. There was another one, but I didn't go yesterday.
I'm more interested in the fact that you were thinking in terms of changing the world then, because I didn't.
You didn't?
I wasn't.
What were you thinking of?
Guitar.
Yeah, I mean, when I say change the world, obviously, I was doing all the things that teenagers do. I was like not playing the guitar, but hanging out with people who did.
But the fact that you riled up your school.
Yes, that was rounding up my school and being a ringleader for that. That was specific to me. I was not just a follower. I was a leader in that particular instance. I didn't do that all the time. I was not particularly an activist in the school. Otherwise, it was just that one time.
No, because I wouldn't have even been thinking about like the plans to go. I wasn't even noticing very much what the government was doing when I was like 17, 18.
I think it's an environment thing.
Do you think it's a French thing?
Well, possibly a French thing. Quite probably my family and where they come from and who they are that makes it that I can't say that I was huge into politics, but that's the moment where a lot of France just like got up and started to protest. So whether what side of that you're on depends on the environment you come from, I think. And if you come from parents who are like, no, we just, those are the crazy peasants. Don't do that. Now, they probably don't talk like that, but that's my opinion from that side.
I'm sorry.
No, it's like those crazy peasants. What are they protesting about? Just they're breaking things. Just don't do that. We don't do that. We're just, let's go to work. And by let's go to work, you're just like, on top of your factory looking at your minions kind of thing.
Oh no, that's really good.
And while I can't actually pretend to be like a worker, I mean, that's the environment I come from.
Yeah.
My grandparents on my mom's side are refugees. So they're immigrants, they're refugees, political refugees, because they fled after Franco's invasion. They grew up as immigrants and as ostracized within an environment that was very French, and they spoke Spanish. So while, you know, I don't have the color of skin thing, and I like really not, so I'm a white guy and I have all the privileges coming along with it for sure. And my grandparents worked really hard so that my parents' generation would not have the same fate of like, you know, hardworking builders type thing, like tradesmen. And but grew up within a, you know, very lefty leaning, protesting workers' rights, you know, just all that kind of that kind of environment. To make it short, it's more complex than that, of course.
Yeah.
And then so my mom, out of her siblings, is the one that left her town because she married a foreigner, and left the house. And my dad made a lot of money, so then he lost it all, right? They spent it, he lost it all. So there are several periods of their lives. Anyhow, that my point there is to say I can't say that I've grown up in an environment where I was, you know, raised by people who worked at a factory, who were really like dealing with workers' issues. Although I did grow up after my father, you know, they lost everything. We were evicted from 2 different homes, lost a lot of furniture. So I've had an interesting mix, and I might have said this before, I can't remember, of growing up in a fairly posh, far suburbs of Paris, but very quickly not having any money. So we were living in a big house that was an empty shell.
Wow.
So, and it was cool. I had a great time. I had a fantastic time as a teenager, but I clearly did not have as much money or means as my friends, even though I was living in a kind of place where you're supposed to be. Now, there's a Kenny to every group. So I guess in some aspects, I was the Kenny of the group. No, my parents are not crack people like Kenny's parents possibly maybe are, maybe. But I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, I'm talking nonsense perhaps at this point.
No, but
my
you
original
had a
point,
definite
point
feeling.
was I grew up in an environment where it's normal. You go and protest against the man.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
though I, you know, well, like, to loop it back to communication and advertising is mostly serving the man. So I work in an environment that is mostly serving the man. And it's interesting because so I started, as I was saying, I'm grading the first step of one of my classes, the master students' year-long personal research project, which is like a sort of a thesis, I guess. And they can choose their own, like whatever the topic is, but it needs to be something current to do with marketing communications.
Okay.
And I've helped a lot of them formulate exactly what their research topic was. And it was interesting to read a lot of them. Now, I know they didn't have a lot of time. It's the first draft. They're going to rework it all, etc. So, you know, just don't, if any of them are listening to this, don't take this as a bad judgment on you, but I'm still going to use it. I'm not naming anybody in particular, but this happened over like nearly half or more than half of the students. So it's not a surprise. But it's so interesting to see they're all getting on their soapboxes about issues that they care about, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but the thesis is not about saving dolphins. The thesis is about communications, and just giving me wide sweeping statements about, you know, everybody knows that killing dolphins is wrong. I'm like, that is not research. You have to substantiate what you're telling me.
Yes.
You have to assume the reader doesn't know anything.
Yes.
Or it's better, because I'm like, if I read something like that, riles me up to. If I read something like everybody knows this, I'm like, no, I don't. What are you talking about? Plus, there's no facts to support what you're talking about whatsoever. And now the other interesting thing is, I also believe, and I encourage them to do this, which I'm half wondering if that was a mistake or not, that you can fit anything within communication, because if you want to save the dolphins and that's your cause, guess what? You're going to have to tell people about it. How does that work? Now, to make it, you know, kind of a serious research project, then I would recommend focusing not only, but perhaps you can focus on certain organizations. I don't know, Greenpeace, because Greenpeace communicates, Greenpeace has marketing, Greenpeace needs to raise funds, Greenpeace has a lot of different ways of operating. That's what you want to go and research.
This is really good because I
think it's useful for everybody. By the way, that was one point I was going to make about your students, and we're going to come back to a lot of like the question itself.
Yeah.
But your students saying that they're going to be more successful than you, and why are you teaching them this, is really fascinating, because of course they're young, they don't know. So, and I'm discovering this as well, being a teacher now. I mean, discovering, I knew this kind of like intellectually, but now I'm experiencing it, which is different. Teaching is not the same thing as doing the job. So if you're a successful business person, doesn't mean that you'd be a great teacher. Most of them aren't.
Completely.
Most of them are not good teachers, because what they're focusing on is whatever it is they're doing for their business, which is great. So, to each his own. But most of your students would not be very happy to have a successful businessman teaching them.
This is really interesting because in school,
of course, having them intervene to come and talk about their experience is probably awesome. But it's not the same thing as teaching, I think.
There was the TV program where they did a whole thing. This is quite a while ago, documentary in the UK about a school, and they got these like super high profile people in their field to teach a bunch of teenagers. And so you had like prominent historian like teaching history to, I don't know, like GCSE students, like 15, 16-year-olds. And he was terrible. It was terrible. And like there is something about how you communicate as a teacher to allow people to learn and explore and discover and think, versus being really good at whatever that thing is. Now, like, business is one of those subjects that's really weird because it covers both. And I'm really glad.
It's also weird as a subject to call it, because there's so many different things. Business is just everything.
It is. And I'm glad that I wasn't always a teacher. I'm glad that I did a bunch of stuff. Well, not really a bunch of stuff, but I had a career before a career as a teacher. And even now, like, I don't necessarily just want to stay a teacher. I'm interested in, which is why we're having this conversation, right? Because I'm interested in what can I create that has an impact.
Yeah.
Which does go back to the question about how do you succeed in.
Yeah. So how do you succeed in a career? What is it? In a career in communication?
How do you succeed in the communication field?
There's
a bit about success, and there's a bit about the communication field.
So the communication field, let's talk about that for a bit, because it's as broad and vague as business.
Yeah.
Now, if you're one of the students from the example that you're like, you want a big house, a big car, and you want to make tons more money than your teacher, which is weird to begin with, but why not? Or that your parents, I don't know, whatever your goal is, you want to make lots of money, then in general, the communication field, as broad and vague as that might be, is probably not the best area for you. It's just clearly you're not going to make the most money. Right now, communications in general is under a lot of threat. But it needs some further definition what the communication field means, because now, however, if you want to make a lot of money, or if you want to be successful or be happy at whatever you're doing, knowing and doing communication and being better at it, generally speaking, is very, very useful. But I also think what I mean by that, which is what I'm spending a lot of time teaching and trying to get across to my students right now, is the value of thinking and how to think in general, which we've talked about a bunch, and we're going to keep talking about in various different angles. So the communication field, otherwise, besides saying that it's broad and vague, it's usually, we talk about creative communication, so it tends to be, I think we're talking about marketing careers. So there's one whole branch of marketing careers that are still going to be, there's still lots of jobs in that for sure, which is to be a marketing person within a business, probably a large business, because those are the large business have the largest marketing teams, all the way up to being a chief marketing officer for a big company. And successful chief marketing officers can then become CEOs. So that's definitely a branch within business altogether. Now, there's a lot, we could go into a whole debate about defining communication versus marketing, how that fits. I'm not sure that's that useful right now to begin with, to begin that kind of conversation. So that's that's one side. I've come across a lot of people coming from having graduated, either MBAs or big marketing degrees, masters or business degrees that start a career in marketing, and that I consider don't know anything about marketing, that are bad communicators overall. So, but what they tend to be good at, depending what kind of business they work at, is the business they work in. What I mean by that is the corporate culture. That reminds me of an interview I had a few years ago about potentially going to work for a big corporation, which I've never worked in a large corporation. The largest companies I've worked with are big ad agencies, and they're not at all big corporate companies. And I was told by the interviewer, who was an amazing man, by the way, he was looking for my kind of specialism, but it is difficult to find my kind of specialism to go work for that kind of corporation and stay, because we tend to want variety. And this was particularly about digital marketing communications. And he was telling me that most of the people you'll find in all corporations, this was a big car company, but similar for all big corporations. We're talking Procter & Gamble, Unilever, like the businesses that own everything, PepsiCo, et cetera, right? Those are the ones that have big marketing departments and communication departments. People get better at what you need to be successful within the corporation. So the ins and out, the in and out workings of Procter & Gamble, of Toyota, of Shell, of Unilever, etc., rather than a specific knowledge pertaining to a role, because people tend to rotate from business to product management to project management to etc., marketing, just like office jobs. People rotate around. So what you become better at is not necessarily the field of communications or marketing, but you become really good at being an employee of that corporation and how it works, and what you need to be successful within that corporation.
I think that distinction is very powerful, very, very important. Cool. To get I think it is, because and that's something that a lot of my students don't understand, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate. One of the modules in the business A level is all about business culture. I love teaching it. School cultures are unique as organizational cultures, and it's one of the things I'm super interested in.
It's very interesting.
To get really
I have my class. I need to finish my class. My last class tomorrow is the one about global brands and brand culture, and I've barely been able to broach the topic of brand culture because I have so little time. I have so little time to do stuff that I've mentioned a little bit of it, and that also means that I've not even spent that much time researching it myself to form my own opinion about what should be taught within that field. Within 2 hours.
And teaching is a bit like that. You're constantly refining and exploring and discovering, and working in a big company and getting good at being in a big company and knowing how it works and playing the game of that is very different from being really good at a particular specialism.
And now, of course, being a great communicator helps in any way.
Now, this is the other thing I wanted to.
But we'll get to that point. Wait, this is only one side. Sorry, did you want to stop me?
I just want to add something into what you're saying, because I think what you're saying is brilliant. I do. I'm
on form.
There's the communication field. Of marketing communications, communication strategy, brand strategy. There's that, but there is also, and you're making these points, but I want to make it super clear. The idea of being good at communicating and communication and putting your point across and thinking. And I think that is something that I'm also incredibly passionate about, being able to give those skills to young people, but also my colleagues, because they've got very good at teaching and they've got very good at being in a school, but they don't know how to communicate an idea in a way that allows things to affect change. And I think you've, again, the thing I like what you've done is distinguishing communication and the communication field and marketing communications and how they interrelate. And being good at communication means you can be good at a lot of things, being good in the communication field is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So, and then the whole being good within a company means you can lose a specialism. So were you going to talk about that bit?
I was going to talk about other jobs within communication fields. What else is in the field?
Yeah. So what else is in the field? Because I when you say communication field and communication marketing, I do think of that traditional stereotypical marketing. I don't know how much Mad Men has got to answer for reinforcing stereotypes about ad agencies.
Well, that's the second part. I think the second biggest part of the field that we haven't mentioned yet is all the people that are communication professionals that tend to work in what's called the communication groups that are in the midst of massive changes. That I don't know how we talked about this a little bit, I think, but maybe not that much.
Do you mean like agencies, communication?
So,
agencies?
I mean, communication networks and groups, holding companies are. So the biggest ones are Publicis, WPP. So WPP is the number one, Publicis number two, Omnicom number three, Interpublic, and each one of them own a bunch of agencies, and that means branding agencies, advertising agencies, media agencies, PR agencies, digital marketing agencies, production companies.
Right.
Yeah, that runs pretty much.
Sometimes I miss that vibe because I worked in a media agency for 5 years, something like that.
That's most of my employment has been with that kind of world.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry if I'm repeating stuff, but it doesn't matter, I guess. So I guess that's the other big area of what you might be talking about when you mean the communication field, or what that student's asking. What is that?
This represents teaching tangents, by the way.
Okay.
That's what you're doing. You've got the thread and you're going off on tangents all over the shop, but there's definitely some kind of unifying thread which you might return to.
I got
I'm going to add another arrow that loops.
Circles.
I'm going to add another one that loops back on itself. Well, you have got one. There is one there that goes.
Because this is all making it look like they never turn back to the center.
Then I'll add another one in. So, marketing agencies.
Yeah.
Communication. The big agencies own loads of other agencies.
So it's not. So the big ones are called communication holding groups or networks.
Okay, I didn't know.
And they own agencies. Typically.
Okay.
Now that whole field is changing fast because for the whole industry is under enormous amounts of pressure. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of layoffs this year. They've just announced a lot more layoffs, and the kinds of people I don't know for sure of the list. Like, last week, Disney announced 32,000 layoffs.
Oh, wow.
Danone announced thousands of layoffs. So there's going to be a lot. And some of those are going to be marketing people for sure. I don't know how many, but definitely a lot. So whether we're talking about the marketing people within big corporations or the agencies. So the agencies, there's been a lot of layoffs this year. There's going to be a lot less jobs. I've heard from people I know in London that salaries are going down. Freelance day rates are going down already in the UK. And there's a phenomenon that had been happening for the several years that just massively accelerated this year because of COVID. Because of lack of business, because of everything going on. One is there's entire areas of business that have suffered enormously. So the first thing that you suffer that when you're suffering as a business is you just get rid of any unnecessary cost. And one of them, if you're not doing any business, then marketing expense is an unnecessary cost.
Yeah.
So there was already a downward trend of decreasing marketing budgets for big companies. Yeah. So Procter & Gamble, Ford have been decreasing their marketing budgets. That marketing budget is the direct lifeline for those agencies that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That's how they earn their money. Mm-hmm. So if there's less of it, that's a direct impact. Mm-hmm. There's another impact that has been going on in the past few years. Again, I might be repeating myself, but it doesn't matter. Maybe the other person hasn't watched another episode. Is the big tech companies. So there's a big duopoly between Facebook and Google owning all the ad dollars of the media side of things that you were talking about. So all the media money that was going to the agencies to manage and then making a percentage on is going a lot more directly to Google and Facebook, so they're not making that money. Unless in some cases, it still needs to route via the agencies in terms of budgets, but they're not really making as much money as they used to. And there's a lot more people employed within the big tech companies that are servicing the marketing department. So that's a kind of new, well, new-ish, it's years old, but there's a line of potential careers for people, communications professionals, to go work for tech companies. And not only in their marketing departments, but also in their marketing departments, but people that are dedicated to work with clients on the media and marketing side of things.
Which relates to this idea of communication.
Which does relate to this idea of communication. And people like me, there's a bunch of either creative directors or planning strategy directors that have moved to tech companies because there were just job opportunities, and they have so much more cash than the communication groups.
So it kind of goes where the money is.
Yeah, and then the other strain that's been going on is the big consulting groups, who are also extremely rich compared to the communication networks. We're talking of companies that are worth billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions, tens or hundreds of billions, instead of tens of billions, hundreds of millions.
So, but which kind of companies are you talking about now?
Oh, sorry, the big four. We're talking about Deloitte, Accenture,
yes,
McKinsey. Well, Deloitte, Accenture. What were the other one? Big I guess Capgemini, but is a smaller one. What are the other big ones? Anyway, those guys started buying design and creative agencies a few years ago.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So big ad agencies, design agencies, creative agencies have been started to be purchased by Accenture and others, Accenture, Deloitte, etc. Started Accenture Digital. There's under which they're folding really. So Droga 5, which is a hot creative like advertising shop, was purchased by Accenture, I want to say, as well as Karmarama in the UK, which is also like, that was a really nice, hot, independent creative advertising shop. So so they're now trying to reorganize all themselves to be able to sell communications as well. So again, another big threat to the traditional communication groups, the kind of ad agencies I used to work for.
But
they're merging companies left, right, and center. Some of the big groups are eliminating some of the oldest names in advertising to merge them with digital agencies. Anyway, the whole industry is lost. All the clients are increasingly putting a lot of strain on the value of those agencies, as the agencies have been managed increasingly, and this is like a little bit more of my opinion, but you can go and research it, have been managed increasingly by finance departments.
Yeah.
Just the normal business stuff of eliminating fat. And if thinking and creativity from for the untrained eye or for the financial eye looks like, just, what is this? Let's get rid of it. You're not doing anything. But at the same time, that is arguably, and I believe, the main value that the agency is bringing.
Yeah.
And then all that's left is just operational stuff. And the biggest clients are now, the big corporations used to have very, very year-long, 30-year-long relationships with ad agencies that they're cutting.
So there's a few questions I want to ask about.
There's tons of stuff going on. So
you mentioned some of the biggest names in some of the biggest ad agencies. Which ones were you thinking of?
So, for example, JWT.
Yeah.
J. Walter Thompson.
Yep.
Does not exist anymore. It was merged with. It doesn't exist as a name anymore.
Okay.
It was merged with a digital agency called Wunderman, and it's now called Wunderman Thompson.
I didn't know that.
Y&R, which is also one of the oldest names in advertising, Young and Rubicam, got merged with this is WPP. WPP is the biggest UK network, and it's the biggest network in the world. They merged it with a digital agency called VML, and now it's called VML Y&R.
Wow. One of my colleagues used to work for JWT.
And JWT is just, it's a legendary name in advertising for the people who know. So to get rid of the name and to say, just that name needs to go. In terms of branding, it's really interesting. And they've done a bunch of those. And in terms of branding, it's also, obviously my opinion, right? But I think it's dreadful. They just tacked on those names together with you're well, you're communications professionals, and all you could do with that one was just let's just eliminate that part of the name and put that one together and done.
Because I suppose from a financial point of view, how do you quantify? This is a big question, right? So quantifying the value of a brand as an asset to someone who thinks in terms of finance is very difficult. And
Well,
maintaining that value.
there's a lot of stuff for thinking the value of the brand. What is more difficult is quantifying the value of the work that is being done for advertising or for the brand or for communications in general. So it's always been traditionally counted in man hours,
Yes, it has.
right? But
Yeah.
then you usually would go to what is visible about this. What is visible about this is the production. That means somebody is designing a thing, shooting something, writing something,
Hmm.
and that's what you pay for.
Hmm.
Usually what you want to eliminate quickly is me, which is the thinking person,
Mm.
because thinking is intangible,
Mm.
except that thinking and ideas is what produces the whole
Mm.
the whole reason of being for this industry, I argue, is to say, well, not for the whole industry necessarily, but for the kind of branch that I work in terms of marketing and brand, et cetera, which is there's a basic idea to say that if your brand is valuable and people recognize it as such, then people are ready to pay for a premium over and above the product that you're selling. And you don't have to look very far for that. You look at Apple. Why is it more expensive and people are happy to pay for it? Because they have a very strong brand.
So this
Now,
goes
that's
to,
not the only reason. The strong brand is intimately linked to the product itself,
yes,
obviously,
yep.
and it doesn't like it's not completely separate. But the whole idea is how do you bring all those things together and be a communication specialist in such a way that your message and the way that you present yourself means something over and above what you're able to do, which is also why, I mean, this is also in thinking fast and slow type things.
Hmm.
If you present yourself very well and as a trustworthy person, people will think that you're trustworthy,
Hmm.
whether you are or not. And so presenting yourself has value over and above what you're actually able to do. Confidence begets confidence, or breeds confidence, whatever you want to say. So let's say you might not be the strongest candidate for a job at the skill needed for the job, but if you come across as a really trustworthy person, maybe it puts you on the same set and skill as the person who didn't come across as trustworthy, but has a stronger skill set. That's the value of communication, or one of them.
And I think you spoke to the question as well. How do you succeed in the communication field? Are you someone who can provide value by doing the thinking, coming up with ideas, and then presenting them effectively in a way that allows a business to progress?
But that's another thing where the question is complicated, and it's another version of how do you define success. Is there's a lot of different kinds of jobs that require different kinds of skills and different kinds of profiles within the
Mm-hmm.
communication field. You need project managers, people who are extremely good at managing complex schedules, understanding the skill sets and the languages and the jargons of all sorts of random, very different kinds of people together. So they're organizational experts who can juggle with tight deadlines, last minute changes, etc. So that's a whole skill set in itself. And to be successful in that, you need the kinds of stuff I just mentioned. To be a creative director, you need to have, or creative of some kind, you need to have a lot of ideas. That's where I would argue thinking is really essential. Typically and traditionally, there's people that split out between being writing experts and being visual experts. Um, the lines are a lot blurry than they used to be. There's a big need for a lot of programming and coding skills, because there's increasingly, everything is digital and communication is digital. So there's a need for people with those kinds of technical skills. There's a need for smart, savvy, knowledgeable sales, more types like managing accounts, managing sales, managing marketing. So there's like a little bit more what's usually called account managers or business managers, new business. There are people who work in strategy, of course, which tends to be the job which is idealized, perhaps. A lot of people want to go into that because it kind of looks cool, but that's where there's the least amounts of jobs.
So you've
There's
got
very small teams. It's very difficult to get into. And
strategy,
there's less and less of
sales.
those, as I've mentioned, because there's a
Yeah,
lot
the
of environments that don't
creative.
value thinking.
Yeah. So you got the
And you can
strategy.
be, by the way, you can be in any of the other jobs that I mentioned, you can be strategic and a good thinker, and it's valuable in whatever the career path you take.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned the creative, the strategic, the sales type, the project management.
And you need
The
a bit of everything and all of that,
yeah.
because communications ultimately is about selling stuff.
Yep.
If you're a creative director, you need to sell your ideas internally and externally. I'm a strategist. I need to sell my strategy. So it's different kinds of, arguably different aspects of sales, but the general gist of it is whether you're working in marketing or whether within a big corporation, or, well, more so if you're working in with an agency, you need to be able to sell stuff for your clients, convince them that this is the right idea to go with, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's entire whole fields that have emerged recently, which is influencer marketing, managing
Yes.
influencer programs, managing like who you work with, doing what. Obviously journalism as well through PR, but that's like a little bit, well, it's still strong. The partnerships, there's a whole area of events and partnerships, which like go figure where that's going to go. I have some students who tell me they want to work in events, and I'm like, okay, I don't, what is this going to look like? No idea. Yeah. So
Managing Zoom events. Who knows?
managing Zoom events, that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So what do you need to be successful? It's just a vast question because it's a vast field. And I think you're starting to get like from the examples, and I'm covering the most of it. There's tons of other things going on.
But one of my students, she wants to work in marketing, and I think everything you've been saying today would be incredibly useful for her.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell her.
I mean, it's
to
probably
listen
going to be
this.
useful for my students who also are generally interested in communications as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and also one of the most amazing things, I thought I understood the industry quite well before getting into it, because for a couple of years as a way to make money, and what turned out to be, well, it was intentionally a stepping stone, and I managed to succeed that way, which is weird to most people because not a lot of people do this. But you know that I do a lot of.
You don't do things conventionally.
No, I don't. I don't do things conventionally. I worked as a recruiter, headhunter for a couple of years for marketing communications and digital agencies, as a way to learn more about the industry. And that's also where I found out about my current job. And then I thought, oh, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And because I'd worked for a couple of years, I'd met a lot of people in the industry. I helped people find jobs. I helped hire. So I thought I understood it quite well. And then I started working with an agency and realized that I didn't understand anything. And one of the expertises of the communication industry is to communicate as a brand, an agency, for them to communicate who they are, what they do, et cetera.
Sure.
And there's tons of buzzwords to make it look cool, but also to make it, to realize that you're just extremely vague and you don't understand what an agency does until you're actually working there. So there's a whole skill in itself or experience to understand the front and, well, I was going to say the front and the backstage. Yeah, the front of the stage and the backstage. The front of the stage is all the show. There's a lot of stuff going on in the backstage. When you like go interview for an agency, you look at their website, particularly you're a bit young, you never worked on this before. You're like, wow, it's so cool. They do all these things. They look at their website. They're transforming the way that people communicate. And look at this really cool thing that they've done with influencer. They put on this concert. Awesome. And then you go
and they've got all their list of awards.
That just
we got this award
giant
and
mess,
that award.
and that everything is held with duct tape and.
Can you give me some of the buzzwords?
Well, I can go into. All right.
Because slight aside, two of my students.
I'm opening a couple of websites of agencies randomly.
Okay, so slight aside, two of my students in one of my classes were playing, and this has happened before. This is the second time it's happened. They were playing Mr. D'Souza bingo. So what they were doing is they made a list of things they thought I'd say, like has a go at this pupil, talks about the destruction of capitalism, talks about like what else? Taxing the rich, and they had all these things planned out, and every time, and I think I realized partway through what they were doing, so I was deliberately not talking about stuff.
That's funny.
It's very
So
funny.
I'm not going to name the name of the agency, but I'm just going to their about page and what we
But
do.
this is the kind of thing you could do. This is the marketing
So
buzzword.
what we do, our generous ideas create solutions for a client's needs for their business challenges now and their business opportunities next. Wow, this is not the craziest of it. Brand communication, PR and social, direct and digital communication, digital products and platforms, human insight, film and print production.
Oh, there we go. Human insight. Oh, that sounds cool.
Wait, let me.
Any of them talk about ROI?
This is I thought it was going to be a little bit more grandiose. Let's go with this one about us. I'm not naming them because it's a whole. All right, so we inspire growth for ambitious brands. Brands everywhere face the challenge of growth. This is hard to achieve in the ever-changing, complex, and uncertain world of rising consumer expectations and disruptive technology. Brands need to move at the speed of culture. Wunderman Thompson is a growth partner. Oh, well, I said the name, sorry. Part agency, but I talked about them before. They're one of the biggest in the world, so they won't take it bad. Part agency, part consultancy, part technology company. That's one of the big things. Everybody's trying to do all of those things. We inspire growth by applying inspiration everywhere across the consumer journey. Our inspiration is born of bringing creativity, data, and technology together. Cool. Maybe before we end, well, because it's fun, I'll share my screen and show this funny video that I'm thinking about.
Are you gonna have the sound gonna come through? There's a whole thing with Zoom and sound.
There is, but this Zoom should work. Wait, I don't know if you've seen this one before. All right, there you go. So I'm just locating the video. Right.
Okay. While you're looking, did you read that link I sent you about those guys who?
Yeah, and I shared it with my students. Thank you so much for that.
It did make me laugh.
It's good. All right. How do you see my screen? Are you?
I can see it. Generic brand video. I think you should maximize YouTube.
Yeah.
And then.
And the sound should work. All right, that's good. This is the kind of stuff you'll be doing if you work in a creative team.
We think first of vague words that are synonyms for progress and pair them with footage of a high-speed train. Science is doing lots of stuff that may or may not have anything to do with us. See how this guy in a lab coat holds up a beaker? That means we do research. Here's a picture of DNA.
That was a conical flask, not a beaker.
There are a shitload of people in the world, especially in India. See how we're part of the global economy? Look at those farmers in China. But we also do business in the USA, or want you to think we do. Check out this wind energy thing in Indiana, and this blue-collar guy with dirt on his face. Also, we care about the environment, loosely. Here's some powerful rushing water and people planting trees. Our policies could be related to these panoramic views of Costa Rica. In today's high-speed environment, stop-motion footage of a city at night with cars turning quickly makes you think about doing things efficiently.
And all this stuff works. It's so just.
Lest you think we're a faceless
so many
entity,
of these videos.
Look at all these attractive people. Here's some of them talking and laughing, and close-ups of hands passing canned goods to each other in a setting that evokes community service. Equality, innovation, honesty, and advancement are all words we choose from a list. Our profits are awe-inspiring, like this guy who's looking up and pointing at a skyscraper or a kite while smiling and explaining something to his child. Using a specific ratio of Asian people to black people to women to white men, We want to make sure we represent your
Ethnically
needs and
ambiguous
interests.
people is
Or
one
at
Yes,
least
of
a
the terms
yes.
version of your skin color in our ads. Did we put a baby in here? What about an ethnic old man whose wrinkled smile represents the happiness and wisdom of the poor? Yep.
So there you go. So basically, to be successful in the communication field, you need to be able to do stuff like this, sell stuff like this, and make everybody dream with things like this.
Oh, have
And
you
it's
seen?
so corny, but it works. I mean,
Yeah, have you seen?
have you
I
looked
think
at the
it's-
Christmas ads for this year? I spent a lot. That's part of the reason I spent so long writing my
No,
subject
I
for
haven't
the
actually.
exam.
I haven't.
I watched a lot of the Christmas ads, and and I couldn't.
Have-
Some of them I couldn't help like having just a tiny bit of a teary eye. I'm like, it's so bad. Why am I just like tear jerked?
Have you seen every tech ad ever from College Humor? It's very similar to that. It's
Yeah, there's a
brilliant.
bunch of those.
And the other thing,
One that's
that-
good. The Match.com ad for the Christmas is pretty good.
that one also. So that's watching that. Oh, there's another thing. The TED Talk one where they talk about what they're doing is the TED Talk. Have you seen that?
I think I've seen that a while ago.
Again, just absolute genius.
There was one like this in the spring for COVID ads, because all the ads were the same. They were all like sad music, caring about people in the world, and they just took stock of like every one after the other, and they were all the same.
Moving at the speed of culture. it's all gone meta. We're talking about what we're talking about, what we're talking about. Yes. I think that's probably a good place to end. That's
It's a
how
good
you
place to
succeed.
end. I don't know. I was just thinking, is this a little bit too much of a cynical note to end on? I don't know. Maybe.
But this is how you succeed in communication. You communicate what there is to communicate by finding out what there is to communicate.
Yeah, you do, and you do that by doing research. And you back up your claims with numbers, with research, with evidence, and or illustration. So there's this notion I've been trying to communicate with my students as well of illustrating and demonstrating, which I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but you demonstrate by providing evidence. You illustrate by showing examples. Examples bring stuff like breathes life into your claims or your points. So it's not about the fact that I don't want any opinions or we don't want to see any opinions. It's that everybody's got opinions. I don't really care about that. And your opinion is baked into what you're presenting. You've chosen what you're presenting because you think it's the right thing. So it's already done. I don't need to talk about that.
Very good. Very good.
Cool.
I like it. I am going to recommend this episode specifically to one of my students. I think she'll enjoy it.
I'll recommend it to my students because it is related to the field they are studying. They want to be professionals in, and I can talk about that for a lot longer. So,
yeah, great.